Alrighty, welcome everyone. Happy Thursday. And if you're seeing this, it's probably just first period. I'm doing the spelling bee for the March Madness, like of course I am. I'm an English teacher, so because I'm doing that first period, I obviously can't teach you guys directly, so I'm creating this. Today we're mostly going to be looking at free verse poetry. We'll also be looking at some of the answers from last night's homework over the Raven and just some of those notes. We'll be talking that over. We'll be going over a piece of vocab, and then we'll be looking at a couple of free verse poems. So stick it out and watch this whole thing, and you should be pretty good to go. So your student learning objective for today, students will review some answers about the Raven, read through several free verse poems, and then create a poem of your own. So the poem that you will create can be free verse, or it can be a sonnet, or some haikus, or an acrostic, whatever it might be. So we will explain that when we get there. But you're going to be creating a poem, and you'll have some flexibility on what type of poem you want to create. So your bell ringer for today, out of the types of poetry that we've seen, haiku, sonnet, acrostic, free verse, or narrative, which has been your favorite and why? So just personal opinion. Take some time right now to answer that. And even if you just need to pause this video, do that and turn that in, and I will grade it, by the end of the day. So your vocab for today is archaic. This is a pretty good word. The definition of archaic is antiquated, old, or out of use. Antiquated, old, or out of use. And some synonyms are ancient, antique, obsolete, or venerable. Antonyms are updated, modern, or contemporary. Any sentence. The 1998 Honda Civic's cassette player was quite archaic. We couldn't listen to it because there was no aux cord. So archaic just means like out of style. It's too old to be in the modern world. So this little cassette guy right here is saying, I'm not obsolete, I'm retro. Now, the cassette player is just a piece of archaic technology. It's a little too old, it's too dated. You're not going to find any cars that have cassette players. No one uses cassette players anymore, stuff like that. So that's what we mean when we say archaic. Okay, so a couple of questions with the Raven. First, do you think the Raven is truly physically happening, or is this a dream, nightmare, something else? Hopefully you've answered these questions from your notes from yesterday, and if you didn't, well, we're about to discuss some answers. So personally, I don't think that the Raven is happening for a variety of reasons. In the beginning, we find out that the narrator is like almost falling asleep because he's staying up, he's reading, it's late at night. And then right as it says he's about to fall asleep, that's when he hears the rapping. So maybe he just like fell asleep and this whole thing's a dream. On top of that, ravens, like they need to eat. They're living things. So when the narrator says that the Raven is still sitting there, it doesn't seem like a real Raven. So if it is not a real Raven, because I don't think it's truly physically happening, what could the Raven represent or symbolize? So you could say a lot of things here. I personally think that the Raven represents or symbolizes the character's depression or mental illness. So I say that it could be depression because for a lot of people, depression hangs over them, and it's it constantly reminds them that it's there. So just like how the Raven constantly sits on this guy's like above his fireplace, depression constantly reminds someone that they're there, and they go through their entire lives dealing with this issue. And just like this guy was always reminded, whatever he did, about Lenore, about his depression, about whatever had happened to him. So, excuse me. So I think that the Raven represents some sort of like mental disease, or some like form of depression. It could also just be like a physical representation of his own grief over losing Lenore. Could be a lot of different things. So what is the tone or mood of the poem? The tone, so that's how the narrator emotionally feels. I think the tone is very sad. It's very despairing. It's very like he's given up, like exhausted, I guess, because it seems like the entire time he's very down because Lenore is dead. And then it just gets worse when the Raven constantly says nevermore and brings more and more bad news. So the tone of the narrator, I think, is very depressed, very like frantic, kind of crazy. The mood, however, how are we, the reader, supposed to feel? I think it's supposed to be creepy, just with the whole nighttime setting, the talking animals, even the fact that it's a raven. You know, ravens are really smart, but they also will peck your eyes out. So that's never a good thing. So I think the mood is supposed to be creepy. It's also what Edgar Allan Poe is kind of famous for. So that's some quick review over that. If you didn't turn in that assignment, make sure you do so. You're still in that 24-hour grace period. Okay, so moving on to free verse. And we're moving quick because, I mean, normally we would wait for some discussion or whatever, but can't do it if I'm just here by myself. So throughout these last 3 weeks, we've looked at several types of poetry, all with varying degrees of structure. So we've looked at sonnets, which are very structured. We've looked at haikus, which are very structured but very short. Yesterday we looked at acrostic, which is like that vertical and horizontal. Narrative poetry is a little like less, or is significantly less structured. You can kind of tell a narrative poem however you want. Usually it has some rhyme in it, sometimes not. So today we are going to look at free verse, the type of poetry where there is no structure. And we'll look at several free verse poems and briefly discuss them, what they mean. And after looking at a few examples, then you'll be able to come up with your own maybe. So our first poem that we're going to look at is "O Captain, My Captain." So this is by Walt Whitman. This is the same guy who did Miracles. And so the first thing you'll notice is this kind of looks structured. Like, Mr. Marvin, I thought you said there was no structure. Well, Walt Whitman has chosen to make these 3 stanzas just in his own way. Like this is not any particular form of poetry. So just because it's shaped like this does not mean that it is anything other than free verse. You'll see that there is still a little bit of rhyme scheme, but this is still technically free verse because this doesn't fall into any specific category. So let's read through it and we'll talk about the meaning. So, "O Captain, My Captain" by Walt Whitman. O Captain, my Captain, our fearful trip is done. The ship has weathered every wreck, the prize we sought is won. The port is near, the bells I hear, the people all exulting, while follow eyes the steady keel, the vessel grim and daring. But, O heart, 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 O the bleeding drops of red, where on the deck my captain lies, fallen cold and dead. O Captain, rise up and hear the bells. Rise up, for you the flag is flung, for you the bugle trills. For you bouquets in ribboned sheaths, for you the shores are crowding. For you they call, the swaying mass, their eager faces turn. Here, Captain, dear father, this arm beneath your head. It is some dream that on the deck you've fallen cold and dead. My captain does not answer. His lips are pale and still. My father does not feel my arm. He has no pulse nor will. The ship is anchored safe and sound, its voyage closed and done. From fearful trip the victor ship comes in with object won. Exult, O shores, and ring, O bells, but I with mournful dread walk the deck, my captain lies, fallen cold and dead. So just looking at the poem initially, there's a lot of contrast here. So these first few lines in every stanza, the first 4 lines are talking about how like everyone is celebrating the captain of this ship. They're saying, hey, the bells, they're ringing for you. The people are gathering for you. Everyone is super excited to see you and be with you. And then the last 4 lines contrast with death, the death of this captain. And Walt Whitman, he lived during the 1800s. He lived through the Civil War. This poem is written about Abraham Lincoln. So if you look at it from that perspective, Walt Whitman is a sailor and Abraham Lincoln is the captain. And Abraham Lincoln guided the United States through the Civil War, and he became president when it was just starting, and he died about a week or so after the Civil War ended. So he took the country through that and eventually reunited it. And so all of the people are celebrating, exulting. They're saying, yay, the captain, he's awesome, because he did make it, he brought them through the Civil War. And yet, he's still dead. So despite everyone being happy, Walt Whitman can't really get over the fact that Abraham Lincoln, his captain, has died, because he has just so much respect for him. So, "O Captain, My Captain" is a poem to Abraham Lincoln from Walt Whitman, kind of expressing his sadness, his regret at his passing, and it's his way of honoring a president that he really respected. So what's the point? What's it about? It's about Abraham Lincoln. Okay, our next poem is one of my personal favorites, and if you watch Breaking Bad, you'll know this one too. This is "When I Heard the Learned Astronomer." So this, our last poem, was very, it had some structure, but it's still kind of a cross between that and free verse, because it's not like a sonnet. It's not. So it does rhyme. This is where we truly get into free verse. So free verse, there's no meter, there's no rhythm, and there's no rhyme. So this is what you might be looking at when you're making a poem today. Because free verse is it allows you to just put your thoughts onto the paper without having to deal with any structure. So when you think free verse, think like this, because this, no rhyming, no meter, no structure, just ideas. And you decide how you want to lay it out. So this is "When I Heard the Learned Astronomer." When I heard the learned astronomer, when the proofs, the figures, were ranged in columns before me, when I was shown the charts and diagrams to add, divide, measure them, when I, sitting, heard the astronomer, where he lectured with much applause in the lecture, how soon unaccountable I became tired and sick, till rising and gliding out, I wandered off by myself in the mystical, moist night air, and from time to time looked up in perfect silence at the stars. So, one of my personal favorites. And what's the point of this one? So it starts out with all these, for the first half of this poem, with all these whens. This is following some person who is in college, and they are studying astronomy. And then when they are listening to these professors, when they're looking at the figures and the math and the science, and when he's listening to these lectures with so much applause, he just gets sick of it. And so he walks off by himself and just stares up at the stars. And to me, this reflects how sometimes school can crush some of the natural curiosities that we have. So if you just appreciating the stars because you think they're pretty, or because you think that they're beautiful or fascinating, sometimes learning about them and dissecting them and making it a chore to learn about them takes away the fun and the curiosity and the life that you found in them in the first place. So that's what happens to this guy. He loves the stars, he loves nature, And so he goes and decides to study it. And then when he starts studying it, he realizes that it's losing the fun for him because it's now like it's a task and not just something he enjoys. So how does he go back to his happy place? By forgetting school, leaving the professor, not worrying about the math and the science and all that, but by just appreciating the thing that he originally fell in love with. So maybe that's happened to some of you. I know that, like myself personally, when I was in college, I went into college and I loved reading. I absolutely loved it. And then when I became an English major, I had to read so much. Like I was reading like 3, 4, 500 pages of stuff a week, and it burned me out. It went from being like a hobby to a job, and it ruined it for me. And it took me several years before I could start reading again. Now I enjoy it again, but it took some time. Okay, so lastly we have This Is Just to Say by William Carlos Williams. So this is kind of on the very opposite end of like structure. This is totally unstructured, and William Carlos Williams is known for writing very short poetry. So here is his poem. This is Just to Say by William Carlos Williams. I have eaten the plums that were in the icebox, and which you were probably saving for breakfast. Forgive me, they were delicious, so sweet and so cold. So, sometimes, what's the point with this one? Sometimes poetry isn't about capturing these like huge ideas and big things like that. Sometimes poetry is just about capturing the kind of mundane, everyday parts of life, and so that's what I think this one does pretty well. This is just some guy apologizing to someone else about eating some plums and not really being that apologetic for it because, you were probably saving them, but man, they were sweet. They were delicious. They were cold. So good. And so there's a set of emotions that we can kind of relate to there too. Like, yeah, we can relate to the last poem, When I Heard the Learned Astronomer, because, we've all gone through things that kind of dampened our appreciation and excitement for something. But we could also relate with drinking that last soda that was in the fridge, eating that last bit of ice cream, taking that last brownie, and then getting in trouble for it. But man, it was worth it. So sometimes poetry doesn't have to be super deep and philosophical and life-changing. Sometimes it can just capture ordinary life. Okay, so what you are going to be doing for the remainder of the class period, you are going to create a poem of your choice. It can be about any topic, and you can use any form. So for the sonnet, if you choose to write a sonnet, different from the one you made before, mind you, you need to follow the sonnet format. 14 lines, 10 syllables per line, A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G rhyme scheme, if you want to do that. If you choose to write a haiku, you must create 3 haikus, all following the haiku formatting of 3 lines, 5, 7, 5 syllable structure. Again, you can write it about anything you want. If you want to make an acrostic poem, you need at least 10 different lines of acrostic poems. So it can be one large acrostic poem, like one really long word, or it can be a couple smaller ones. It's up to you. A narrative. If you want to make a narrative poem, it needs to be at least 15 lines rhyming about a story. So maybe you're talking about coming to school. Maybe you're talking about the time you almost got in trouble, something like that. Just come up with a story. Lastly, free verse. It needs to be at least 15 lines, unrhymed. It can be as long or as short as you want, about a topic of your choice. And that's the thing. With these, you're just creating a poem, because tomorrow we're going to be watching a movie in class. So this is like our last time that we're going to look at poems this year. So because of that, we're just going to stop and reflect and have one last opportunity to do something creative with poetry. So you can either make a sonnet, a haiku, or some haikus, an acrostic poem or two, narrative poem, or a free verse poem. And the choice is yours, and you can write about whatever you want. So where am I going to write that, Mr. Marvin? Let me see, right here. So you're going to create that poem right here. So you'll tell me what type it is. So if you're going to make a sonnet, put sonnet. Or if it's free verse, okay, something like that. Put your topic. So is it going to be about basketball, love, life, whatever. The title, use a title, something fancy. And then your poem. So you just type it here. Keep track of the lines yourself according to whichever poem you choose. So again, if you choose, like depending on what type of poem you choose, you'll have different line requirements that you need to follow based on this. So that's your assignment for today, people. Yeah, just reading some free verse poems, and then you're making your own, and you can choose what type and what you want to write about. So anyhow, I will see you guys tomorrow. If you have any questions, email me, and yeah, have a good rest of your day.